Welcome to topic 2, utopias, one of my favorites. So we're going to have kind of a strange mishmash of groups here. So do your best to try to encapsulate some of these different utopian experiments into your graphic organizer. So in general, our utopian societies are focusing on the following things: productive labor, so no kind of freeloaders in any way here. Gender equality, which is a novel thought, especially in the age of coverture here, and slave-free products. So a lot of these are going to be coming out of the abolition movement. So hold on for that presentation next. Most of these are going to be very short-lived, with the exception of the Mormon religion, which is classified as a utopia, and the Oneida community. But they are going to lead to other reforms for some of these people. So some people that get involved in these utopias, this becomes a jumping off point for getting involved in the abolition movement or the women's rights movement or things like that. These are all born from the Protestant religion. We're seeing a high representation of Lutherans here, especially in New Harmony, so we'll dig into that. If you're familiar with the Transcendentalists, they are heavily involved here. And if you aren't familiar with them, I've got a slide on next on them. Just for kind of context, this term utopia really begins, we see common usage of this term after Sir Thomas More's book more than 500 years ago. So he took this pretty far. He had even created utopian language and things like this. But the word utopia, it had been around for a long time before Sir Thomas More as well. So it comes from the Greeks as well. All right, so who are the Transcendentalists? They're coming out of the Romantic movement. The Romantic movement was looking to balance this kind of dead hard reason and logic that we're seeing in so many of these scientific movements with emotion and nature and spirit. So we're going to see a big gravitation to the natural world with these folks. So European names to associate with this movement are Wordsworth, Shelley, and Keats. Our Americans are Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. So they become known as the Transcendentalists because they have this belief that through hard work and really spending time on kind of fixing ourselves, that humans do have the ability to transcend, and you can discover your own purpose and your own inner light. So books like Walden, still very popular and influential today, are going to inspire groups to try to remove themselves from the society at large. So it's really moving away from this idea that, oh, we can all work together and fix society. So a lot of these folks are just removing themselves and saying, let's take a smaller group of people and let's just kind of start over and see what we can come up with. Once again, we're back to the burned over district. So remember, this is from the Second Great Awakening. So in New York. So you can see that a lot of these utopias are founded in these kind of areas as well. So you've got your Millerites in particular, who are maybe the most bizarre of all of these groups, which is saying something. So they're in this area, but we're also seeing utopias in other places. We're going to see New Harmony in Indiana. We're going to see some outside Boston. So they're kind of all over. All right, let's start with the Shakers, or the Shaking Quakers. So this is a group that is formed by a woman. Her name is Anne Lee. And so the Shakers believe that she was actually the second coming of Christ. You're going to see this is going to be a common theme in several of our utopias here, either preparing for the second coming of Christ, or they think that they're already here. So again, it's an offshoot of the Quakers. Like, we're familiar with our Quakers, had been really influential in the development of Philadelphia in particular. So they are an offset or an offshoot of this particular group. So like the Quakers, the community meeting house is the center of their lives on Sunday. But something that's different about the Shakers is dancing. There was a lot of spontaneous dancing that would go on for hours and hours and hours. The idea is that they're being filled with the spirit, and they can't stop themselves. So they have these kind of dance-offs at the end of their meetings, and this is how they get the name Shaking Quakers. So their focus is on simplicity, celibacy, common property, equality between the sexes. We're going to see a couple of these utopias really focus on celibacy. The downside of celibacy, of course, is that it's going to be hard to get new members. So an easy way to get new members is through reproduction. So if you have celibate members, that's going to be challenging. But we see a lot of them advocate for celibacy because a lot of the squabbles or problems that were happening were as a result of arguments within couples or marriages. Equality through the sexes, gender equality, really huge, important piece of utopia. So definitely make sure that you have that in your notes. So because they can't add new members through the traditional method, they're going to add them through adoption and conversion. They are extremely successful economically. And one of the ways that they are successful is through their furniture making. So even today, Shaker furniture, if you can find it, is extremely valuable. So if you ever come across it, go ahead and pick it up. So they're getting involved in a lot of different things. So not just furniture, but herbal medicines. They're breeding cattle and then selling that livestock off, and their vegetable and flower seeds that they're shipping all over. And the idea behind the furniture, stick with me, this is odd to say the least, but the kind of explanation of why this furniture was so impressive and so beautiful, even though the design was pretty simplistic, the attention to detail is pretty astounding. But the idea was that because they are no longer spending time and energy on sex, they are putting that sexual energy into furniture making. So that's the story. They'll peak with 6,000 members, and there are a couple still practicing today, but only about 3. So again, hard to keep your numbers going strong when you have celibacy. So those are the Shaking Quakers. On to the Millerites. You can probably tell from this slide that this is going to be some fun stuff here. So they are predicting the exact date of the end of the world. And you can see there, it was 1843. Obviously, we know that's not what happened. So this is William Miller. He's a really impressive speaker and is, really getting his start in the Second Great Awakening. He's a circuit rider and that sort of thing. And so he gets a really fervent following. So people are really interested in what he has to say. And he becomes quite obsessed with prophecies and how to kind of come up with these things. And so he predicts that Christ is going to return in 1843. And I know you're asking, how did he come up with that particular date? He created this complicated calendar, looking at certain words in the Bible, and those words were equated with a number, and he created this formula. And so that's how he came up with it. And so this is not just this one small group of people that are buying into this. Millions of people are buying into this, and they are just waiting with bated breath to see if this is true, to the point where people are selling off their property and writing their wills, and they're really wrapping up their affairs, and they're preparing for the rapture. They're preparing for the end of the world. And of course, it doesn't happen in 1843, so it becomes known as the Great Disappointment. Miller really worked hard to try to convince people that he wasn't wrong. He came up with a couple of different ideas. The first was that he tried to come down from heaven, but he got stuck in the clouds. The other idea that he was promoting was that, well, maybe he did come down, and he took a look around and was like, no, pass. I think I'll go back to heaven. So that is the Great Disappointment. But he will go on to be a founding member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is still around today. But he will die 5 years after the Great Disappointment. All right, on to Oneida, probably the most radical of the group here, especially for this idea that John Humphrey Noyes comes up with, which is called complex marriage. And I would say all marriage is complex, but he really takes it to a different level. So he is practicing something called perfectionism. And this is really different from what we've been seeing previously. If you think about this kind of Calvinist ideal, it's all pretty negative, and that everything's predestined and humans are kind of terrible and like beasts and that sort of thing. But that's not his idea. So he claims that his followers have become so perfect, they've achieved a state of purity, purity of heart. And he really is the center of this particular group. And we see that in some of these groups, that there's one just really kind of dynamic character and everyone's kind of revolving around this particular person. So in some of these, you're seeing it's not really focused on the community at large, but it's focusing on this dynamic personality. And he really rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And so it's the people in the surrounding communities are going to try to run him out of town as a result. Okay, so if that name Oneida is familiar to you, you might find it in your silverware drawer. Oneida is still around today, so it is a silverware company that's still around. But it starts as a factory. They were making other steel products. They were making steel animal traps and things like that. So the members of this community are all working in this factory together. There's no private property. Everything is communal. And then this is really his claim to fame, with how bizarre it is. And so this is his idea of complex marriage. And again, this is the idea that no one belongs to anyone else. So to some extent, you can make an argument this is somewhat feminist ideology in changing this nature of marriage. So more equality focused here. And so any coupling that wanted to occur, the man would propose relations with any woman and she could accept it or reject it. This is definitely not the case in regular society. You know, if a man was going to propose marriage or a relationship with a woman, it would go through her father and he would decide. So more rights for women here in this way. And then these couplings are going to be registered in a book. So you're going to see an early form of eugenics happening here. So you're going to see that John Noyes and people at the very kind of top of the hierarchy will stand in the way of some pairings as a result. Kids are going to be raised by the community rather than specific parents. So you've got communal property and communal children. Again, they're going to be chased out by the neighboring communities because of these marriage beliefs. Some remained, and that is, kind of sets up the basis for the Oneida Company today. And it's a joint stock company. All right, Brook Farm. This one is founded by a transcendentalist, George Ripley. We have seen excerpts from letters between Emerson and Ripley on DBQs in the past. So we have seen Brook Farm, so this is a good one to have at your disposal. So this really was, let's see if we can take these transcendentalist ideas and put them into practice and make them practical. So you're gonna have individual freedom here, focus on humane relationships, and the idea of combining the thinker with the worker. So this is going to be financed by selling stock. So we've got a sort of joint stock company going on here. And so this is a working farm, hence the name Brook Farm. And so they're going to be selling off farm related products. Everyone is paid equally for their labor, even women. This is, bizarre in society in the 1800s. They're also going to run a for-profit preschool. There weren't very many preschools in America at this time, so this was kind of mind-blowing for a lot of people to be looking at really early education. And so that was very, very profitable. And you have primary and a college prep school. So it becomes very well known for its school system, really looking at this movement from level to level to level. It's different, obviously, than kind of the Prussian model that we're seeing with some of the other education reform that we've seen before. So this would be closer, I think, to what you would associate today with kind of like a Montessori type of education, a little kinder, gentler than what we're seeing in the Prussian model. Right, and just to let you know where this is, so this is Brook Farm and this is Boston. Decline, the farm was never financially viable. So they weren't really pulling in enough money. Again, they're more well known for their schooling system than their actual farm products. And then there's a fire in 1847 that destroys most of the buildings, but there is one left that if you want to go and visit at Brook Farm, you can still see today. All right, and New Harmony. So this is an interesting one. This is in Indiana. So there's two different names here. So there's Harmony and New Harmony, but most of the times in USHAP documents, you're just going to see reference to New Harmony, and that's fine. So it's founded by a German named George Rapp in 1814. He was a separatist Lutheran, and so he had been jailed several times for his religious beliefs in Germany, and so he decides to come to America so he could practice his religion freely. Similar to some of our other societies here, also preparing for the second coming of Christ. His followers will move on 10 years later, and so it will be sold, and that's when it becomes New Harmony. They have a pretty successful granary and a bank that was really successful too. So successful, in fact, that they were loaning money to the state banks. They're renouncing marriage, practice celibacy. You can see some continuities here between these different groups, and communal child rearing, so similar to Oneida. And then it will be bought by Robert Owen, who is a Welsh philosopher. He's extremely well known. When he comes to the United States, there's a joint session of Congress that he addresses and tells them that he's just bought those 20,000 acre settlement, and that is New Harmony. So that's in 1825. No social classes here, no private property, and equality for the genders here as well. The really important thing about New Harmony is that it establishes our first real trade or vocational schools, which is really important in terms of significance. And it will disband in 1826 due to internal fighting. Owen was really trying to grab kind of a really weird combination of people. So you basically had scientists and misfits and not much in between. So they were making some pretty cool scientific discoveries about plant and animal life, but there really weren't enough workers. So you had people coming from too diverse a background. All right, Mormons. So this is associated, even though this is obviously a practicing religion today, it is also associated with the Utopian Movement because it's being founded around the same time, and they're doing kind of a separatist move as well. So you can really kind of set up Mormonism as a truly American religion. It's a religion that begins completely in the United States, which we really hadn't seen in terms of a major religion. So it's founded in 1830 by Joseph Smith, and he is from the burned out district. All right, so this is where it gets fun. He claims that an angel came to him and led him to a stash of buried golden plates. He translates them into the Book of Mormon. And so what these books said, or what these plates said, is that the ancient Hebrews had come to the New World. It was news to a lot of people. And they had actually been the ancestors to the Native American communities in the United States. So this is definitely a new reading on that. So Joseph Smith ends up being murdered by a mob in 1844 in Illinois. He was waiting for trial for inciting a riot that had destroyed an anti-Mormon newspaper. So transfer power really is going to happen here, and so Brigham Young will take over. If that name sounds familiar, there is a Brigham Young University in Utah. So today in Utah is still kind of considered the foundational or the headquarters of the Mormon religion today. So big numbers in Utah. So believers are being led to this idea of a new Zion. So Brigham Young is going to lead them on the Mormon trail. So what happens to the Mormons really shows the limits of religious tolerance in the 19th century. For a nation that was really founded on the freedom of religion, they have a pretty tough go at it, that they are going to be chased out of town after town for their religious beliefs. So this is the Mormon Trail. It's a great piece of evidence to utilize if you can. Okay, so here we go on our trail. First stop, New York, burned out district, Joseph Smith, starting the first Mormon church in 1830. And then he's going to build a church here outside of Kirkland. And then Smith will be held in jail here, 1838 and 39. This is where he's murdered in Illinois. And then you'll see the travel from Nauvoo all the way through to Salt Lake City in the 1840s. Right, so our covered wagons there. This would not have been an enjoyable experience, not at all, to be traveling in wagons with all of these families over ice and snow. So it's a rough go. We'll obviously dig into the Oregon Trail a little bit later, but just if you're familiar with that, kind of some similar problems that they're going to be dealing with here. All right, so we have to deal with the elephant in the room here. So this concept of polygamy. So this is something that has really dogged the Mormon religion even into modern day. So I think it's important that we dig into this. So it is an unorthodox practice for the time in the 1830s and 40s. Brigham Young, it said that he had more than 50 wives, but most were widows that he was providing for financially. So as they're settling in Utah, even the legislatures there are upset about this practice. And so there's going to be an anti-bigamy act that is passed in the Utah territories in 1862, so not long after the Mormons arrive. This practice is ended by the Mormon Church in 1904. Yet this reputation continues to follow them even into modern day. If you followed, this is going back a little ways, but when Mitt Romney ran for president, he was a practicing Mormon and still is, and this became just a common question on the campaign trail and in the debates. And it was very frustrating for him to have to continue to answer these questions when it's a practice that had been outlawed by the group, more than a century ago. So there are some fundamentalist groups that do still practice polygamy, but they are seen as fringe, and they are not a part of the Church of Latter-day Saints. That's what LDS stands for. So anyone that is caught in plural marriage is excommunicated from the church. So again, it's eradicated in 1904, but it's something that still continues for Mormons to have to deal with. So this is a really famous Mormon church. They're really impressive buildings. If you've ever driven through La Jolla in the San Diego area, there's a pretty pronounced church in that region as well. If you're interested, take a look at this New Yorker article from 2016. So that's talking about modern movements for reform and what they can learn from these intentional communities of the 19th century that we've been digging through. So take a look at that if you're interested. But again, this is completely optional. Okay, so I'm not doing this for all of the reforms here, but because this is such a weird mishmash of groups, I do want to show you what your chart should look like at its most basic level for your graphic organizer. Okay, so we've got your leaders. There's going to be a lot here, but go ahead and add that. And you would add Ann Lee in there for the Shakers. Societal problems that they're trying to address. So gender inequality, slave-produced goods, dealing with social economic change, gap between the rich and poor, focus on a group dynamic with a bigger focus on the individual as a result of the market revolution. How you would connect this to the market revolution, slavery being perpetuated by textile factories with few opportunities for women, loss of religious focus in society because of work and this factory movement. And these groups see too many drastic changes as a result of the market rev. Audience who would be involved here, those dissatisfied with new ways of living brought about by urbanization, mechanization. So we'll see a lot of abolitionists as we saw there. Solutions to their problem: reorganize society on a cooperative basis. Some prohibit sexual relations altogether, where others try to change marriage patterns. and separating themselves into new societies. So hopefully that is helpful to try to kind of boil down the significance of these very varied groups.